still don't know if what happened that night was real or a cruel trick my mind played on me. I was walking home after my shift at the diner, the cold Massachusetts air biting at my face. The streets were deserted. The only sound was the distant hum of streetlights and the crunch of my boots against the pavement. I had taken this route 100 times before, a narrow road lined with skeletal trees and old houses that seemed to be drowning in shadows. But that night, something felt off, like the air itself was thicker, pressing against my chest, making every breath feel labored. As I walked past an alley, I thought I heard something. A whisper, low and guttural, slithering through the darkness. I stopped, holding my breath, but there was nothing there. Just an empty alley and the distant wail of a siren. I picked up, my pace trying to shake off the unease curling in my stomach. The streetlights flickered, casting strange, jagged shadows across the cracked sidewalk. Ahead, I saw a figure standing under a broken lamppost. At first, I thought it was just another late-night wanderer, maybe a drunk trying to find his way home. But as I got closer, I realized the figure wasn't moving. It just stood there, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, as if listening for something. My skin prickled. I forced myself to keep walking, pretending I didn't see it. When I finally reached the spot where the figure stood, I glanced to the side, and my blood turned to ice. The figure was gone. No footsteps, no sound. Just the suffocating silence of the empty street. I walked faster now, my heart hammering. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but my legs felt heavy, as if I were trudging through thick mud. Then I heard it again, the whisper, closer this time, curling around me like smoke. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was barely audible, but it sent a bolt of terror straight through me. I spun around, searching the darkness, but there was no one there. Just the empty street, the dead trees, and the flickering lights. I was being watched. I could feel it, a presence lurking just beyond my vision. Something old and patient, waiting for me to make a mistake. I broke into a jog, forcing myself not to look back. The houses along the street seemed abandoned, their windows gaping like black mouths. I reached an intersection and hesitated. Left or right? I had always gone left, but something in my gut told me that tonight, I needed to go right. I turned and came face to face with it. A figure, taller than any human should be, its limbs stretched unnaturally long, its face obscured by the darkness. I couldn't breathe. My body refused to move. Then it took a step forward. I stumbled back, my instincts taking over. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away. The sound of footsteps followed me, matching my speed. I turned down another street, hoping to lose whatever was chasing me. But the moment I looked back, my stomach dropped. It was still there, gliding rather than running, its form shifting in the dim light. I reached my apartment building, fumbling with my keys, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. I slammed the door behind me, locking every bolt, my chest heaving. Silence. Had I escaped? I stood there, panting, my back pressed against the door. Minutes passed. Then slowly I turned to look through the peephole, my breath hitched. A single eye stared back at me, unblinking, too large, too wrong. I recoiled, stumbling backward. A whisper slithered through the crack in the door. "You shouldn't be here." Desperation clawed at my throat. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slipping over the screen as I tried to dial 911. The call wouldn't go through. Static filled my ears, a deep, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. I had to think fast. My grandmother used to tell me stories of spirits that fed on fear, that thrived in the shadows. They were parasites of the mind, growing stronger the more you believed in them. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to breathe. "No," I whispered, "you're not real." The whisper outside the door turned into a snarl. The temperature in the room dropped, and for a second, I thought I could hear the walls breathing. I clenched my fists and repeated, louder this time, "You're not real." My heart pounded as the whispers turned into an agonized wail. I opened my eyes and stepped forward, pressing my palm against the door. Silence. I looked through the peephole again. Nothing. The air in my apartment felt lighter, as if the weight pressing down on me had finally lifted. I collapsed onto the floor, shaking, but alive. Whatever had been hunting me was gone. For now.
I don't know why I took that route. Maybe I was distracted, lost in my own thoughts, or maybe it was something else, something I wasn't meant to understand. It was a cold autumn night in Louisville, the kind where the wind carried whispers. That didn't belong to the living. I was on my way to meet some friends at a bar downtown, my boots clicking against the damp pavement as I walked alone. The streets weren't entirely empty, but they felt that way. The flickering streetlights cast long, dancing shadows, and for a moment, I had the unsettling feeling that the darkness was watching me. I turned down a quieter street, trying to shake the discomfort creeping up my spine. The buildings here were old, their facades weathered and cracked. I could hear my own breathing, steady but tense, mixing with the distant hum of the city. Then I heard something else. Footsteps. They weren't rushed or heavy, just slow and deliberate, matching my own pace. My heartbeat quickened. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone hurrying home, but the street was empty. The footsteps, however, did not stop. A cold dread settled over me. I tried to convince myself it was just an echo, some trick of the city's acoustics, but deep down, I knew better. The air felt heavier, thick with something unseen. I quickened my pace, but so did the steps behind me. My stomach tightened as I reached the next intersection. I had two choices: turn toward the busier streets, where I might find safety, or take the shortcut through an alley, where I could escape whatever was following me faster. My instincts screamed at me to choose the crowd, but my fear won, and I turned into the alley. The moment I stepped into the narrow passage, I knew I had made a mistake. The air was different here, stale and unmoving. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, bouncing back at me as if the walls themselves were whispering. Then, everything went silent. No distant traffic, no buzzing streetlights, just an oppressive, swallowing quiet. I forced myself to keep moving, refusing to look back. If I looked back, I knew I would see something I wasn't meant to see. Then, a breath. Right behind me. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked in place. I felt something brush against my shoulder, light, almost curious. I turned my head just enough to see a shape in the darkness, too tall, too thin. Its limbs stretched in ways that defied nature. Its face, or what should have been a face, was a void, a space where something should be but wasn't. My throat closed, a scream dying before it could leave my lips. It moved without sound, gliding rather than stepping, closing the distance between us. I bolted. My feet pounded against the pavement, my breath ragged. The alley seemed to stretch endlessly, each turn leading to another narrow corridor, as if the city itself had twisted into something unnatural. Then, a light. A single flickering bulb above a door. Without thinking, I lunged for it, my fingers barely gripping the rusted handle as I yanked it open and stumbled inside. The moment I slammed the door behind me, the noise of the city rushed back in. A car horn, distant laughter, the hum of neon signs. I was inside an old convenience store, the cashier giving me a puzzled look as I collapsed against the counter, gasping for air. I turned back to the door. Through the glass, the alley was empty, but the shadows lingered, deeper than they should be. And somewhere, beneath the hum of the fluorescent lights, I swore I could still hear breathing, I forced myself to stand and straighten my jacket, my legs trembling as I stepped out of the store and back onto the street. The noise of the city wrapped around me like a protective blanket, grounding me in reality. I walked quickly, resisting the urge to glance over my shoulder. With each step, the tension in my chest eased, though my skin still prickled with the memory of what I had seen. Minutes later, I reached the bar. The warm glow of neon, signs, the sound of laughter, and the clinking of glasses pulled me back into normalcy. My friends waved from a booth in the corner, their faces familiar and safe. As I sat down, I forced a smile, trying to push away the lingering dread. "You okay?" one of them asked. I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Yeah, I lied. Just took a weird way here." But even as I laughed along with them, a thought gnawed at the back of my mind. The alley had been empty when I looked back, but I knew, somewhere in the dark, it was still there, watching, waiting.
I should have realised something was wrong when the air went still in an eerie way. We had walked through this town at night countless times, always talking, always laughing. But tonight was different. Claire and I had decided to take a new route, cutting through an unfamiliar trail near the hills outside of town. The California moon hung low, casting its silver light through the twisted branches of the trees lining the path. It should have been peaceful, but every instinct in me screamed that we had made a mistake. "It's too quiet," Claire murmured, almost whispering. I nodded. No distant cars, no rustling leaves, not even the chirping of crickets. Just silence. It felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Still, we kept walking, our footsteps crunching against the gravel path. The farther we went, the darker it seemed to get, and the air grew heavy, pressing against my chest like an unseen weight. Then we heard it. A soft sound, like something dragging behind us. We stopped immediately, exchanging nervous glances. Slowly, I turned my head, my heart hammering in my throat. Nothing, just the empty path stretching behind us. But the feeling of being watched was suffocating. Claire gripped my wrist. "Let's just keep going, we're almost out." We quickened our pace, but so did the sound. Closer, sharper. A second set of footsteps, matching ours perfectly. I wanted to believe it was just an echo, some strange trick of the night, but deep down I knew it wasn't. The trail curved ahead, leading into a denser part of the woods. I didn't want to go in there. My body screamed to turn back, but before I could say anything, Claire let out a strangled gasp. There, at the edge of the path, stood a figure. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs were elongated, disproportionate, and its head was tilted at an unnatural angle. Then it moved. Not like a person, but with a jerky, gliding motion, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. I grabbed Claire's hand, and we ran. Branches tore at my skin as we sprinted down the trail, gasping for breath. Behind us, I could still hear it, that same dragging sound sliding across the ground, following effortlessly. The path felt endless, stretching longer than it should have, as if the world itself had shifted into something strange, something wrong. Then suddenly, the streetlights of the main road appeared, spilling golden light onto the pavement. We didn't stop until we reached it, collapsing onto the sidewalk, panting. I risked a glance back. The trail was empty, silent, but deep in the darkness, just beyond the reach of the light, I could feel it, watching, waiting. Then Claire pointed. There! A few feet away, where the darkness met the light, a dense shadow lingered. It had no shape, but it was alive. We bolted to the nearest house, pounding desperately on the door. A light flicked on, and an elderly woman answered. "Help! Please," I begged. The moment the door opened, the shadow vanished, swallowed by the light. But even though we were safe, I knew this wasn't over. After some time, Claire and I gathered the courage to leave. The old woman assured us that the way back would be safe under the streetlights. We thanked her and stepped outside, hesitating before finally starting our walk home. The night felt calmer now, but the fear lingered. Every shadow seemed darker. Every whisper of the wind sent a shiver down my spine. We stayed close to the illuminated sidewalks, walking fast, stealing nervous glances over our shoulders. But nothing followed us. No footsteps, no murmurs, just the faint sounds of the sleeping city. When we finally reached Claire's house, she hesitated at the door, gripping the doorknob tightly. "Do you think it's really gone?" I swallowed hard and nodded. "I hope so." She stepped inside and locked the door behind her. I ran the rest of the way home, my nerves on edge, my heart heavy. The moment I got inside, I turned on every light, checking every shadow, every corner. That night, I barely slept. Even though nothing had followed us, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching, waiting, and worst of all, it knew where we lived.